Okay.
My name is Mike Bomstein, and I'm an attorney, and my wife and I live just down the road. I'm involved in a couple lawsuits involving Sunoco Pipeline Company. The one here in Delaware County is now pending in the courthouse, and we've had some pleadings and discovery, and we're moving ahead towards an injunction hearing in a couple weeks. This particular property that we're standing on now is owned by Allison Higgins, and we're on the Lanai Road, standing in this small space between Allison's house and the property next door.
Okay. And why have you chosen to show us this space? What is the connection to the Mariner East 2 pipelines?
All right, as best we understand at this time, the Mariner East pipeline is planned to be constructed underground in the space between the Higgins home and the fence next door. So you can see, and if you like, I'll walk you over here a little bit. There's a distance of about 30 feet from the side of Allison's house to this fence. I believe this fence marks the boundary line of the property next door. In that 30-foot space, there are currently existing pipelines as shown by the yellow marker posts. If I can turn your attention about 180 degrees to look over here, you'll see a whole bunch of marker posts running down the road. Now, let's say that this is facing south. The yellow posts on the left, I believe, mark existing pipes, and you can see they go in a straight line that way, up towards here. The yellow posts on that side likewise go down south and come back up here. You don't see those posts right here, but I'm pretty confident that the pipeline that you can show here would be extended through this spot, and I'd be standing on top of one pipeline now. If I walked over here and used line of sight, I believe I'm now standing on top of the other existing pipeline, and these pipelines have been here probably since the 1930s, maybe the latest the 1950s. Now, what you need to know is that there is a 50-foot easement that Sunoco Pipeline acquired that goes between the Higgins property, through this fence, and essentially across and under the property next door. So, of course, they're not going to build a pipeline through the living room of the property next door. The way it works, as we understand it, is that the halfway point, which is the center line of the 50-foot easement, is right about here. That is roughly 5 feet from this fence over here. And let's assume that this is the 5-foot spot. So we took the deposition a few weeks ago of an engineer from Sunoco Pipeline and asked him specifically the question that you asked me earlier: where are the new pipelines going to go? As best we can tell from his deposition, that's the deposition of Matt Gordon, it's not their practice to put two pipelines on top of one another right up the center. That is, you wouldn't expect the two new Mariner East pipelines to be where I'm standing. Instead, it's their practice typically to have one on either side of the midpoint. And this being the midpoint, you would have one pipeline perhaps here, where I'm standing now, which is maybe 5 feet from the center. And the other pipeline, which I think is very interesting, would have to be on my left side of the 25-foot center mark here, which means it would probably have to be in the space where my head is between my arms. Now that has some interesting consequences for the people who live in these properties. For example, if the pipeline were, two pipelines were 10 feet apart, and if you had one right here, then the distance from this new pipeline where I'm standing to the side porch of the neighbor's house is under 10 feet. And likewise, if you went over here and said, okay, this pipeline is 10 feet from that one, then you have a distance of under 20 feet from here to the side of the Higgins home. We think that's very significant. Now, both as a moral matter and as a matter of public safety. Now, as a lawyer, I'm concerned, how does that translate into a possible legal action? And we filed a lawsuit in Delaware County because we believe that the township code from 50 years ago addresses these questions directly. and that there's a basis for a lawsuit alleging that the construction here by Sunoco would be a violation of that code.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell me a little more about the clients that you're representing in addition to the Higgins, and
Sure.
what their concerns are?
Okay. Well, I think it's fair to say they all have similar concerns. There are 6 plaintiffs in the Delaware County lawsuit. Off the top of my head, see if I can remember 6 items. You've got Higgins here on Lenai Road, and you have property owners or apartment dwellers down at the Glen Riddle station on Glen Riddle Road, and you've got a few more across the street on Glen Riddle Road in the Tunbridge Apartments. Finally, you've got somebody who lives in a townhouse development called Glenlock, farther down the road, and he's at the edge of a row of townhouses. Now, each one is situated slightly differently. We have some photographs of the same. I think the Higgins property is the poster child for what's wrong with this pipeline because it's so obvious that it's so dangerous and it's so frightening. But the other ones are concerning too. If you take the Glen Riddle Apartments on Glen Riddle Road, you've got probably a distance on one side of the center point of about 60 feet, and on the other side you've got something less. Now, it's our belief that in the township code there has to be distance of at least 75 feet from the edge of the structure, well, from the pipeline itself to the edge of the structure. So at the Glen Riddle Apartments, it's less than 75 feet. All of these people in common have that the pipelines are not going to be built at the center. Now, the reason that's significant is because there's a separate provision of the township code that says that when you're constructing new pipelines, the pipelines are supposed to be at the center. So pretty much by what their testimony's been in deposition and what we can tell from the maps, the pipes, in the case of all 6 plaintiffs, are not going to be built on center. So we think, at least in terms of complying with the plain language of the code, that's a clear violation. As to the 75 feet, there's some interesting questions of interpretation, but in the case of at least 5 of the 6 plaintiffs, that is the plaintiffs here on Lenai Road, the plaintiffs on Glen Riddle Road, on both sides, that is Tunbridge and Glen Riddle Station, all have structures that are less than 75 feet from the pipes. For example, at Tunbridge, off the top of my head, I think it's about 37 feet, right, not 75 feet. And at Glen Riddle, it's a little bit more. We have the property at Glenlock, where because the plans are not entirely clear, we are not certain as to the exact distance from the end structure, but we do know that the pipes are not going to be centered. So that's what we have so far.
Right. Okay. Here, let me take your keys. So I have one more on-camera question for you, and then we can, talk a little more. As you may know, the government and people of Scotland are trying to decide whether to lift their moratorium on fracking and start their own fossil fuel industry there. Based on your experience with this case or living around here and potentially being impacted, what message do you have for the people of Scotland? Should they ban fracking, or what do you think?
Well, now you're going from my opinion as a lawyer and somebody's in this group to just as an individual.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to duck your question, but if I can at least elaborate a little bit.
Sure.
Thank you. So, the people in the Middletown Coalition come from a variety of viewpoints. I could name half a dozen people who are very similar to my family, and in terms of their politics, I can name another half dozen people who are very much different from our family. We're very proud of the fact that we have a wide range of political views in our group, both Democrats and Republicans and people who are even beyond those parties. The concerns of the Middletown Coalition focus across the board on safety and in violation of property rights. All right? Notice I didn't say the environment. I'm talking about what our group does and what we have in common. And we think it's very significant because, for example, the Glenwood Elementary School is just up the road. That's about 800 feet from where the pipeline is going to be. There are hundreds of children there who can be adversely affected by an explosion, which is very scary. And we have people in our group who are very familiar with the scientific and engineering principles involved here, and they're absolutely convinced that the blast radius is such that if there were a significant leak, there would be fatal injuries, and that there's no reasonable way to evacuate people by the time a leak is detected. It's a horror show. So those are very real concerns. People who are property owners have a separate concern, and that's they ask themselves this question: why should a company be able to build, I don't want to say an infinite number of pipelines, but pipeline after pipeline after pipeline to create capacity far in excess of what is required for any possible needs in Pennsylvania, both commercial needs and individual needs. So, for example, let's suppose that in Pennsylvania the capacity that's actually been used in the last many years, and I'm picking a number that's not 100% sure, is 25,000 barrels per day. And we're talking about hazardous liquids, or what you'd call natural gas liquids, butane, propane, and ethane. Let's imagine a scenario where, for some unaccountable reason, the need doubles in the next 10 years. Call it 50,000. Well, Mariner 1 already has a capacity of 75,000 per day. The approved Mariner 2 has a capacity, I believe, of about another 275,000 barrels per day. And the new Mariner East X, if that's the proper way to refer to it, could bring total capacity up to 700 plus thousand barrels per day. So where is it going? It's obviously, on the face at first blush, not going to be for the use of Pennsylvania, whether it's commercial uses, industrial uses. It's going to be leaving Pennsylvania. And so that raises a very important question. Why should your backyard be available for this commercial enterprise if it's not benefiting the people of Pennsylvania? And that ties in with the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which says that you cannot take people's private property unless the paramount and primary purpose is to benefit the public. We think it's perfectly obvious that it doesn't benefit the public. So a lot of people are PO'd that their backyards are going to be used for somebody else's private benefit. Now, to get back to your original question, personally, my family and I are probably all properly classified as tree huggers. We feel very strongly about these things, and certainly that motivates us in being involved both in the Philadelphia suit and in the Delaware County suit.